ADC players will be loving 25.14 as 3 of their items are getting buffed, while we also have nerfs to some of the more prominent picks from recent patches like Twisted Fate, Lee Sin, Braum, and Set. So we'll be breaking everything down and providing you guys with an update to the solo queue tier list for every single role. And let's be honest, picking the best champions is fun, but is that really enough on its own? I don't know about you, but locking in Warwick just because he's OP tier doesn't really help if you're lacking knowledge on how to stomp lane properly. However, you can stomp lane phase with Warwick when using our brand new courses that go hard in teaching you everything you need to know, which will have you speedrunning any game below Diamond, all from a rank 1 challenger who has used these tips to dominate not 1, but 5 regions in solo queue. And that's just for top lane. Your mid lane OP tier Diana pick becomes actually unstoppable when you know all the essentials in mid lane thanks to the new mid lane series over on our platform that our top 10 challenger player Strompist has tirelessly worked on exclusive to our members. Our tier list gets you the right champions, SkillCapped gets you the right skills, and we're so confident it works. If you don't climb 5 divisions while actively using the platform, you literally don't pay a single cent. So why hold yourself back this season and finally get the rank you deserve? And with that being said, let's get into it. So we're going to be starting the video off by looking at all the item changes and discussing which champions will be influenced the most. Blade of the Ruined King is getting buffed with its percent health damage being increased by 1%. One champ who should absolutely be on your radar for this patch is Warwick. In both top lane and jungle, Warwick has been one of the better solo queue picks lately, so this buff could very well push him over the top. Aurelia is a big winner here, and she was actually just directly buffed last patch too, so a couple of really nice patches for Aurelia lately. For ADC, watch out for Vayne and Kog'Maw. Vayne and Kog have already been 2 of the higher win rate ADCs in recent patches, so they should be in great spots for 25.14. Of course, there's Yasuo and Yone who will benefit from this one, and then Master Yi as well, and then a few others who are a bit more niche with the item, but can still look to run it, including Bel'Veth, Tryndamere, Trundle, Varus, Briar, and Jax. So overall, we're looking at Warwick, Aurelia, Vayne, and Kog'Maw to be a few of the biggest winners from this Blade buff. Kraken Slayer is next up on the buff list with its missing health on hit damage modifier being increased from 1 scaling to 1.5 to 1 scaling to 1.75. And then for an additional buff, cost of Kraken is going down from 3,100 to 3,000 gold. So prior to these buffs, Kraken wasn't being purchased on too many champions. Bel'Veth and Kai'Sa were the 2 champs running the item the most in recent patches, and Bel'Veth will definitely be the clear-cut winner from this buff because she rushes Kraken in almost every single game. A few other champs who may like taking the item due to these buffs include Kindred, Master Yi, Vayne, Ashe, Aurelia, Viego, and Katarina. Phantom Dancer has been overshadowed by most other attack speed items for a while now, so Riot wants to change that for 25.14. The attack speed on PD is up from 60 to 65%, and the movement speed is going from 8 to 10%. The only champion who will surely become stronger in 25.14 due to these buffs is Garen, as he does like running Phantom Dancer as his second purchase. Ashe, Vayne, and Jinx had been running Phantom Dancer very sparingly in recent patches, so we'll have to see if priority rises due to these buffs. It's not like Phantom Dancer had even been performing poorly on these ADCs either, as in its limited sample size, Phantom Dancer did have the highest win rate as Jinx's 3rd item in recent patches. For Ashe, slotting in Phantom Dancer 2nd in place of Hurricane can work really well in games where the enemy team lacks a heavy melee comp. And then for Vayne, if you are playing the crit setup, then Phantom Dancer is always her best 3rd item, following Yuntal and Infinity Edge. We'll have to keep track as to whether or not more champs begin picking up Phantom Dancer due to these buffs, but Jinx, Vayne, and Ashe are definitely ones you shouldn't be sleeping on with the item. Rod of Ages is going to be receiving a buff with its mana going up from 400 to 500. Mana per stack is also up from 20 to 30, and then mana at max stacks is up from 600 to 800. So Ryze is going to be liking this one the most since his abilities actually scale off of mana. Anivia, Twisted Fate, Cassiopeia, Kassadin, and Vhagar are a couple of other champs who had been building Rod very often in recent patches, so they will benefit as well. A strategy that we had been seeing used on a bunch of mid lane champs in pro play recently consisted of stacking Haunting Guys. In 25.14, this will no longer be effective, as you'll be limited to 1 Haunting Guys in your inventory instead of an unlimited amount from before. This change isn't really a big deal for solo queue and won't negatively influence the power of any champs. Spellbook is going to be nerfed for this patch, with its smite damage per swap being lowered at the 2nd and 3rd swap, from 900 to 600 at the 2nd swap and from 1200 to 900 at the 3rd swap. This nerf shouldn't reduce the viability of Spellbook in solo queue all that much, as we expect it to remain a solid pickup on a majority of melee supports. So moving on to the champion changes now, we have a mass amount of changes to Kled that will be going live for this patch. Kled's passive is being changed in a pretty big way so that you become more tanky when you're fighting around multiple enemies. You're going to gain bonus armor and magic resist equal to 1% bonus health, and this armor and magic resist will be increased by 20% for each nearby enemy. So this does incentivize building Kled more bruiser and stacking health with items like Titanic Hydra, Hullbreaker, and Black Cleaver. There are a few other changes to Kled's passive, which include courage from minion kills going up from 4 to 5, champion takedowns cooldowns within 3 seconds of damaging an enemy will no longer grant 20 courage. Dismounted attack damage penalty is being reduced from 20% at all levels to 15, scaling to 0%. Dismounted movement speed penalty is being lowered from 60 to 40. However, movement speed towards champions is going down from 100 scaling to 185 to 70 scaling to 155. So as you can see in the comparison clips, movement speed if you are running away from an enemy will be higher, but if you are running towards them, it will be lower than before. Skarl's base health is being lowered from 400 scaling to 1550 to 400 scaling to 1400. Remount health is being reduced from 45 scaling to 75% of Skarl's max health to 40 scaling to 70% of Skarl's max health. From now on, if you level up while dismounted, you will gain the bonus movement speed instead of remaining at the same movement speed prior to the level up. There are also 9 bug fix changes being issued to Kledd's passive, so we won't waste your time by reading all of them out, and we'll put them up on screen right now for you to read if you want to. Kledd's Q is receiving a few changes, with the bonus AD ratio dropping from 65 to 60%. The big one here is the fact that Kledd's Q will no longer apply grievous wounds after pulling its target. Slow on Q is going down from 40 scaling to 60% to 30 scaling to 50%. Slow duration is up, however, from 1.5 to 2.5 seconds. Q while dismounted is being changed so that the recharge timer is going from 20 scaling to 7.25 seconds to 18 scaling to 10 seconds. Bonus AD ratio of dismounted Q is dropping from 80 to 65%, and as we can see in the comparison clips, you will be losing 17 damage per Q in the mid game because of this nerf. W will receive a bunch of changes, with its cooldown going up from 11 scaling to 5 seconds to 13 scaling to 9 seconds. There will be a new effect on Kled W to where basic attack reduced the spell's cooldown by 1.5 seconds, reduced to 0.5 seconds against non-champions. W bonus AD ratio is going down from 5 to 2%. W bonus AD ratio will now scale off of Kled's bonus health, providing 0.4% per 100 bonus health. So for this one, if you're building Kled with health and taking advantage of that new health ratio, then the damage is higher than last patch, but if you're building in pure AD without any health, this change is a nerf. E will be losing some damage with its bonus AD ratio going down from 65 to 55%. There are also 2 quality of life changes and 1 bug fix change being issued to Kled's E as well. And then lastly, for Kled's R, the damage type is being changed from physical to magic. The minimum and maximum max health base damage will be going up at the 2nd and 3rd ranks in the spell. R bonus AD ratio is being lowered though from 4 to 3%. So what we can take away from these changes is that Kled's losing a good chunk of damage from his spells due to their bonus AD ratios being reduced. However, he's gaining more value from stacking health. W now has a health ratio, and passive also scales off of health, so you're going to be incentivized way more to build health items instead of lethality items in 25.14. The most popular Kled build in 25.13 revolved around Profane Hydra into Voltaic Cyclosword, but that build becomes a lot worse due to these adjustments. Either a Titanic or Stridebreaker Rush will likely become the most optimal for Kled now, and then items like Hullbreaker, Black Cleaver, and Sterix will follow. Where exactly Kled lands power-wise is impossible to say, so for now, we won't be adjusting him on the tier list, and we'll have an accurate rating for him for our mid-patch tier list once we see the changes on live servers. Darius is going to receive a pretty nice buff to his Q heal for this patch, as the missing health heal is going up from 15 scaling to 45% to 17 scaling to 51%. As we can see here in the comparison clip, Darius at level 9 with Stridebreaker is healing for 178 last patch, while he will be healing for 202 in 25.14. With how Darius has been performing in recent patches, we don't see this buff being quite enough to move him back into S tier, but he'll be a solid A tier pickup for 25.14. Fiora is going to receive a buff to her R, as the heal per second is being changed from 40 scaling to 100% based on vitals triggered to a flat 100% regardless of how many vitals are triggered. So what this means is that if you end up killing a target with Fiora but don't end up proccing all your vitals, the heal from R is going to be stronger than before. Of course, if you don't kill the target, then the heal from Fiora R will only proc if you consume all 4 vitals. So it's not a buff unless you kill the target without proccing every single vital. We don't expect this one to add a huge amount of power to Fiora, so no movement for her on the tier list, as she'll remain in S. Riot must have seen the outrage on Twitter over the past week from the clip of a Riven one-shotting Teemo under tower, as they are nerfing Riven's all-in power for 25.14. Passive AD ratio is dropping from 30 scaling to 60% to 30 scaling to 50%. So what does this mean for Riven's level 6 all-in then? Well, what we can tell from the comparison clips is that with all 3 Q charges and weaving in an auto attack after every Q, you are losing a total of 11 damage. So the later the game goes, the more this nerf hurts due to it being an AD ratio nerf, but it's not really going to influence the early game kill threat of Riven by very much at all. There's a chance this nerf hits hard enough to warrant a drop into A tier for Riven, but for now, we'll be leaving her in S and may look to adjust for mid-patch if the change does land on the harsher side. Set has been in the top lane OP tier for a while now, and he's finally getting nerfed for 25.14. Armor growth is what Riot's targeting, as it's dropping from 5.2 to 4.7. So this means that a level 18 Set is now now going to have 8 less armor than before. Honestly, this doesn't seem like that big of a nerf, considering that a lot of the time you won't even reach level 18, so it will be more commonly even less than an 8 armor nerf. Is the nerf enough to drop Set out of the OP tier though, is the question. With Warwick being indirectly buffed due to Blade of the Ruined King buffs and him moving into the OP tier, we think Warwick will be on a tier of his own for 25.14, so we're going to drop Set down into S, but he should still remain a great pickup. So the major moves on the top lane tier list for 25.14 are going to be due to the Blade of the Ruined King buffs. Warwick is going to be pushed up into the OP tier, and Aurelia is going to be moving into S. Warwick was already one of the highest win rate top lane champs in recent patches, so this Blade buff bumps him into OP tier. Aurelia rushes Blade of the Ruined King, so she gets to take full advantage of this buff and should be a great S tier pick. Garen is another champ to watch for this patch because Phantom Dancer is getting buffed, but we're not as confident in giving Garen a push up the tier list as of now, so we'll be leaving him in A. Lee Sin has been dominating the jungle meta, so Riot's tagging him with a base AD nerf as it's dropping from 69 to 66. 3 AD nerf is actually somewhat significant, as we can expect a little over a 1% drop in win rate for Lee. As a result, we're going to be pushing Lee down 1 tier for this patch, going from S into A tier. So Lee Sin is literally the only jungler adjusted for 25.14, so let's dive right into the tier list. The item changes are going to have an impact on the jungle meta for this patch, so let's break it down. For Blade of the Ruined King, Warwick is going to be loving that buff. A little less than top lane because jungle builds it as a second purchase, but it will still provide a nice boost to Warwick for this patch. Especially if you are ranked Emerald or below right now, Warwick should be your highest priority jungle pick, as he will be moved into the OP tier alongside Trundle and Jarvan. The jungle meta is actually perfect right now if you're looking to escape low elo, because both Trundle and Warwick are top tier picks and they feast in the lower ranks. Bel'Veth is another jungler who will be on the rise for this patch due to the Kraken Slayer buffs. Bel'Veth likes to rush Kraken, so she'll be able to take full advantage of the buffs in every single game. As a result, we're going to be moving Bel'Veth up 1 tier, going from A into S. Azir has been the lowest win rate mid for solo queue recently, so Riot's throwing him a bone for 25.14, with base health going up from 550 to 575. WAP ratio is being increased as well from 40 scaling to 60% to 45 scaling to 65%. So nothing out of this world for Azir, and to be frank, there's no way these changes push him back into a viable spot, so we'll be leaving him in the mid lane C tier. Fizz is going to receive a couple of buffs, with his W cooldown being reduced from 7 scaling to 5 seconds to 7 scaling to 3 seconds. EAP ratio is going up as well from 90 to 95%. So more so scaling buffs here that won't impact the early game kill threat of Fizz much at all. We don't see these buffs being quite enough to move Fizz up into the mid lane S tier, so he's going to remain placed in A. Twisted Fate has been one of the more dominant mid lane picks over the past few patches, so another nerf is on the way, with his Q damage being lowered by 10 at all ranks. TF was just barely holding on to his OP tier spot last patch, so with this nerf being issued, we're going to drop him down into S. Rod of Ages buff will give a nice indirect boost to TF, but the Q nerf should outweigh that still. So because Blade of the Ruined King is getting buffed for this patch, Riot doesn't want Yasuo priority insanely high, so they will be directly nerfing him, with his AD growth dropping from 3 to 2.5. So with Blade of the Ruined King getting buffed, as long as you are rushing the item, Yasuo shouldn't really be losing much damage at all for this patch. We think Yasuo should end up in a pretty neutral spot and around the same power level as last patch, so we'll be leaving him in the S tier. Zoe nerfs weren't really on our radar for this patch, but she's going to be nerfed in 2 different ways. Q damage will be dropping at rank 1 in the spell, but is going to stay the same when you have it fully maxed out. W damage is going down pretty significantly, dropping by 15 at all ranks, while the AP ratio is up from 40 to 45%. So with these nerfs coming through, we're going to be dropping Zoe out of the mid lane S tier and down into A. So for the mid lane tier list in 25.14, with Twisted Fate leaving the OP tier, it's now going to leave Diana as the only OP champ. A Rod of Ages user like Anivia, who has been performing very well in recent patches, could be in line for a move into OP, but we'll have to see how impactful that Rod buff actually turns out. Katarina is a mid laner to watch for this patch because her AD build becomes stronger due to the Blade of the Ruined King and Kraken Slayer buffs. Does AD Cat actually become the most optimal way to play her though? Probably not. However, blind picking Cat does become a bit stronger, because if your team locks heavy magic damage, you can transition to the on-hit build and you'll be liking it way more than last patch. So a champion who is more commonly played as a bot laner these days, being Ziggs, is getting buffed for 25.14. Q base damage is going up, and then Q damage AP ratio is down by 5% early game, but up by 15% at max rank. So at level 3 with Ziggs, Q damage will be down by 5 due to these changes. When you have your first item completed though, and a few points in Q, the change ends up as a buff. E damage will also be dropping in the early game, as the AP ratio is going from 30% to 25 scaling to 45%. So at level 7, E damage is 8 less due to the AP ratio nerf at the first point in the spell, but when you have E fully maxed out and are level 13, it's a 45 damage buff. And then for R, the base damage is going up at the second and third ranks in the spell. However, AP ratio is down from 110 to 100%. So is this a buff or a nerf then? Well, on 2 items at level 13 where you have 2 points in R, turns out that this change is a 16 damage buff. So what we can take away from these adjustments is that Ziggs is a bit weaker in lane for the first few levels, but once he gets ranks in his spells and items completed, he will be stronger. We see this as being net positive for solo queue because the early game is not as important unless you are high elo and stronger mid-game teamfight power should outweigh a slightly weaker laning phase. So Ziggs is going to push up the bot lane tier list, going from A into S tier. So for the ADC tier list in 25.14, 2 champs in specific we are keying in on who are getting moved into the OP tier are Vayne and Kog'Maw. Both champions build Blade of the Ruined King as core items, so getting a 1% boost to the max health damage on the item is going to be really nice for them. Kog'Maw was actually the highest win rate ADC last patch, so you really don't want to be sleeping on him for 25.14. With Kog and Vayne moving up, Jinx will be the odd one out, dropping down into S, as we still think Sivir is the most optimal crit ADC that you can play for 25.14. Kraken Slayer and Phantom Dancer are also getting buffed for this patch, but both items have been more niche as of recent, so it's harder to get a good read on whether or not certain champs will be on the rise due to their buffs. With Blade, it was already a very commonly bought item on Kog'Maw and Vayne, so it gives us more confidence in saying that they will definitely gain a good amount of power for this patch. We finally see a bit of a shake-up to the upper echelon of the support role for this patch, with Braum getting nerfed. It's his armor that will be reduced, going from 47 to 42. So a pretty significant hit here, as we just saw Yorick receive a similar nerf like this, and he ended up losing about 1% win rate, so we could expect something of the same nature for Braum. If the nerf does land to the same extent as the Yorick nerf, then Braum will be losing enough power to drop him out of the OP tier, so we'll be placing him in S. And then there's one other support who will be nerfed for this patch, and it's going to be Yuumi. Our AP ratio on the heal per hit is going down from 15 to 10%, so nothing that should significantly reduce the power of Yuumi, at least not to the extent to where she becomes a C tier support, so we're going to be leaving her in the B tier. If we have a look at the complete support tier list now, we finally have a new look to the OP tier for 25.14. Braum had been an OP tier support for almost the entire season, so with him dropping out, we're going to be promoting Melio. Melio and Nami are currently 2 of the strongest enchanters for solo queue, as they've gained a ton of relative strength throughout the season due to many supports around them getting nerfed. With Blade of the Ruined King and Kraken Slayer buffed for this patch, we should be seeing a rise in play rate of on-hit ADCs, and enchanters are really good paired up with the likes of Vayne and Kog'Maw, so this patch is looking really good for Nami and Melio. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So that's gonna wrap everything up for the 25.14 tier list update. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.